Michael Turner thought his dramatic cover-up would hide the truth about his wife's brutal murder, but detectives soon uncovered the cracks in his story, exposing a chilling betrayal no one saw coming. The town had always been a picture of peace, the kind of place where neighbors waved from porches and children rode their bikes until the streetlights flickered on. Life moved slowly, comfortably, and without much fear. That illusion shattered one cold autumn morning when a jogger made a discovery that would turn the entire community upside down. Near the edge of a wooded trail, just beyond where leaves had begun to fall in thick, golden piles, lay the lifeless body of a beloved local teacher. She was known for her warmth in the classroom and her active role in the community, which made the discovery all the more shocking. Word spread quickly through the small town, leaving residents stunned and fearful. Something like this wasn't supposed to happen here, not in a place where people still trusted each other without hesitation. When detectives arrived, they immediately noticed that the scene felt unusual. At first glance, it seemed like a robbery gone wrong. The victim's handbag was tipped over, with money clearly visible inside, and a few pieces of jewelry lay scattered unnaturally close to her body. Yet nothing looked chaotic. There were no signs of a struggle, no random mess that one would expect if someone had attacked in desperation. The jewelry appeared carefully placed, almost as if arranged. The detectives exchanged quiet looks, realizing almost immediately that something wasn't adding up. To seasoned investigators, staged crime scenes were often more telling than real ones because they revealed a perpetrator's attempt to outhink the investigation. The community was horrified but eager for answers. Vigils were held, candles lit, and flowers left at the edge of the trail where she had been found. Parents whispered nervously about safety, while children were kept indoors. The town's sense of security had cracked, and in its place grew suspicion and unease. Behind closed doors, detectives studied the details with care. They took note of the unnatural placement of belongings, the absence of defensive wounds, and the oddly calm environment surrounding the body. This wasn't the work of a stranger in panic, it felt personal, calculated. In that first day, before suspects were even named, detectives knew one truth: the killer had wanted the scene to tell a story of random violence. But the story was weak, fragile, and full of holes. The appearance of robbery was a mask, and beneath it lay something darker. The real mystery was not just who had killed the woman, but why someone had gone to such lengths to make it look like something it wasn't. The quiet suburb had unknowingly become the stage for a carefully constructed lie. Detectives wasted no time moving forward with interviews, hoping to untangle the life of the victim and uncover who might have wanted her harmed. Friends and colleagues painted a picture of a kind and patient woman, someone who spent long hours preparing lessons and volunteering for school events. But beneath those glowing accounts, whispers of personal strain began to surface. Her marriage, it seemed, was not as perfect as it appeared. Neighbors recalled late-night arguments behind closed doors, hushed voices that sometimes rose into sharp tones before quickly falling silent. These small cracks in her personal life gave investigators a new direction to explore. The husband, a respected professional in town, quickly became a person of interest. He claimed he had been at a late-night work meeting the evening of the murder. His story was supported by a few colleagues who assured detectives that he had been with them, but when each was questioned individually, their statements didn't line up perfectly. One insisted the meeting had ended before midnight, another remembered it lasting much later. A third seemed hesitant, stumbling over times and details as though rehearsed but not fully confident. The inconsistencies didn't provide proof of guilt, but they planted a seed of doubt. Detectives also traced the husband's movements through surveillance cameras scattered across town. While some footage confirmed his car near his workplace, there were unexplained gaps during the critical hours when the crime occurred. The missing pieces frustrated investigators, but also hinted at intentional planning. It felt less like coincidence and more like someone had gone out of their way to avoid being seen. Meanwhile, the family and community struggled with grief. The victim's students left letters and drawings outside the school, while townspeople gathered in support of her relatives. The husband appeared publicly devastated, weeping during vigils and speaking of his wife's kindness. Yet behind the scenes, detectives watched his behavior closely. His grief seemed almost too polished, his sorrow shifting quickly to anger when asked detailed questions. The more investigators studied the case, the clearer it became that the robbery explanation was thin. No valuables were missing, and the placement of items felt forced. This left one possibility that chilled detectives. The crime had been personal, carefully disguised to look random. But if it was indeed personal, then the person closest to the victim, the one who should have protected her, might be the one responsible. For weeks, the case sat in a frustrating limbo, with suspicion swirling but no solid evidence to secure an arrest. Detectives knew something was being hidden, and their instincts told them the husband's story was a performance. The real progress came not from interviews or public appearances, but from the quiet, meticulous work of the forensic team. Tiny fibers clinging to the victim's clothing were examined under powerful microscopes. What seemed insignificant at first soon turned crucial. The fibers matched the upholstery of the husband's car, a discovery that instantly changed the tone of the investigation. He had denied being anywhere near the woods that night, but the science suggested otherwise. The deeper they looked, the more cracks began to appear. Inside the trunk of the husband's vehicle, faint traces of cleaning chemicals were discovered. The scent had long since faded, but the chemical residues remained, absorbed into the lining of the car. It was the kind of mistake made when someone thought they could outsmart science with bleach and scrubbing. Detectives knew this was not the work of an innocent man trying to keep his car tidy. This was a desperate attempt to erase evidence. When investigators called the husband back for further questioning, his calm mask began to slip. His once confident answers turned into rambling explanations. He avoided direct eye contact, shifting in his chair, over-explaining details no one had asked for, and falling silent at questions he had once answered with ease. Detectives were trained to spot the difference between genuine grief and calculated avoidance, and the performance in front of them looked weaker with every passing moment. Meanwhile, attention returned to the crime scene itself. Tire tracks that had been overlooked initially were now re-examined with fresh scrutiny. Molds and comparisons revealed they were an exact match to the husband's car. His insistence that he had never driven near the wooded trail unraveled instantly. This wasn't just coincidence, it was a breadcrumb left behind by someone who thought they were too clever to leave anything at all. Piece by piece, the husband's carefully constructed story began to collapse. What had once appeared as an airtight alibi now looked like a web of lies patched together with rehearsed lines and desperate cover-ups. The detectives were no longer wondering if he was involved. The question now was how much evidence they could gather to prove beyond doubt that his hands were the ones that ended his wife's life. The picture of deception grew clearer as detectives pieced together how far the husband had gone to disguise his crime. It was no longer just suspicion. The investigation revealed a calculated performance designed to throw them off the trail. He had persuaded his colleagues to provide an alibi, nudging them to say they had seen him in meetings long after they had ended. He had even drafted emails and time-stamped documents on his computer to create the illusion of late-night work. To the untrained eye, it looked convincing. But to investigators who studied patterns of digital activity, the edits stood out like red flags. The keystrokes and file modifications all pointed to manipulation done after the fact, with precision, but not enough to remain invisible. At the crime scene, his efforts were equally dramatic. Jewelry was carefully placed beside the victim, suggesting a robbery that had never happened. Her handbag was tipped over just enough to appear as though someone had searched it, yet the money inside remained untouched. Detectives recognized these as the mistakes of someone who thought theatrics could pass for truth. Real robberies carried a sense of urgency and chaos, but this one looked staged, polished, and artificial. Forensic testing uncovered even more evidence of staging. The gloves he wore had indeed shielded him from leaving fingerprints, but they couldn't protect against every trace. Minute skin cells and tiny fibers still clung to surfaces he thought he had cleaned. Even the bleach used in his car betrayed him, leaving behind chemical patterns that told investigators exactly what he had tried to erase. Every effort to cover his tracks became another clue, each misstep stacking against him. In public, he maintained his act. At vigils, he wept dramatically, clutching photographs and delivering emotional speeches. Reporters described his sorrow as raw and moving, but detectives watching closely noticed the timing of his tears, how they seemed to flow when the cameras turned toward him and faded when the attention shifted elsewhere. His grief was an extension of the cover-up, another performance for the world to see. By now, the husband's scheme had transformed from clever to transparent. Every move intended to protect him instead illuminated his guilt. His cover-up wasn't fooling anyone anymore, it was unraveling into a trail of evidence stronger than if he had done nothing at all. Detectives understood that his attempts to manipulate the narrative had become the very rope that would tighten around him in court. The weight of evidence finally closed in, and detectives prepared the final steps to bring the husband to justice. With fibers, chemical traces, digital manipulation, and tire tracks all pointing directly to him, the once fragile case now stood firm. The husband was arrested, his carefully built mask of innocence crumbling in front of the same community he had tried so hard to convince. News of the arrest spread like wildfire, shaking the quiet town to its core. People who had once pitied him now whispered of betrayal, unable to reconcile the image of a grieving husband with that of a cold-blooded killer. In court, the prosecution laid out a timeline that left little room for doubt. On the night of the murder, he had left his workplace earlier than claimed, driven his wife to the wooded trail, and carried out a premeditated attack. The motive became clear: financial desperation. Large insurance policies and mounting debts painted a picture of a man who saw his wife not as a partner, but as a solution to his crumbling finances. The cover-up, dramatic and elaborate, had been his attempt to stage a random act of violence and escape suspicion. Jurors listened to the forensic experts describe fibers, cleaning chemicals, and falsified digital records. They heard about the staged jewelry, the suspiciously intact valuables, and the tire tracks that betrayed his lies. Piece by piece, the story of deception was stripped bare until only the truth remained. His defense tried to cast doubt, insisting the evidence was circumstantial. But the sheer weight of connections made the argument weak. Each attempt to undermine the investigation only highlighted how carefully he had tried to construct his lies. When the guilty verdict was finally read, the courtroom was silent except for the sound of the husband's labored breathing. He had spent months trying to control the narrative, but in the end, the truth had spoken louder than any act he could perform. He was sentenced to life in prison, his name forever tied to betrayal and greed. For the town, the verdict brought a mix of relief and sorrow. Justice had been served, but the cost was a life lost and trust shattered. The community would never look at its safety the same way again. The case became a chilling reminder that no matter how dramatic a cover-up may be, detectives trained to seek the truth will always find the cracks, and those cracks will ultimately reveal everything.